Hello, my name is Chris Beaumont. I'm one of the partners at Clive Owen LLP, Chartered Accountants and Business Advisors. We've been working with Academy Trusts for over 16 years, and I'm one of the co-authors of the Kreston Benchmarking Report 2021. This report is based on the results for the year ended 31st of August 2020 and includes over 300 trusts and nearly 1,400 schools. Over the next 5 minutes, I'm going to highlight some of the main findings of the report. Obviously, the main impact on the country and the sector has been around COVID. What we've seen is income coming down in respect of lettings and catering. For catering, that's been offset in part by the grants which the primary schools have received. But for secondary schools, they've lost significant amounts of money, and depending on whether they've been able to furlough staff or not, has depended on whether their cost base is reduced or not. In respect of costs, we've seen significant reductions in supply staff, and I'll show you a slide in a second on that. Maintenance costs, energy and utility savings, fewer educational supplies, and exam fees, where we've seen savings of around 23% depending on the exam board. So in respect of supply costs, you can see that the biggest reduction here is at secondary schools, whereby cover for maternity and illness has not been taken up by the schools. The reason that the drop in multi-academy trusts is not as significant is because they contain more primary schools pro rata than secondary schools. So what has this meant for the sector overall? Well, the change between 2018 and 2019 was a sort of marked one whereby surpluses did return to the sector. And in part, that was a reflection of the little extras that was announced in the budget some 18 months ago now. But again, because of the savings outweighed the sort of additional income that's been lost, the situation for the Academy Trust in the sector is that particularly secondary schools have benefited significantly. However, you may think when you look at the cost per pupil that that's slightly surprising. However, one has to remember that the reason why cost per pupil has gone up is mainly because the Teachers' Pension Scheme employers' contribution went up in September 2019, and that was a massive increase from 16.48% to 23.6%. So that's what's led the large sort of increase in total cost per pupil. However, because of the grant which came in from the government, what has happened is that staffing ratios, be those between pupils and teachers and pupils and non-teaching, have remained reasonably static between the 2 years. I often talk about cash not being the same as reserves, and I include this graph on a regular basis in any presentations I give. So it does demonstrate the fact that, as you can see there, for primary school, the free reserves this year are 291,000 and cash is 365. So there's a marked difference, and that's even more marked at a multi-academy trust. The difference between the sort of free reserves in 2019 and 20 is not quite the same number as on the earlier slide, just because of the way that capital has been allocated. However, what you can see is that the cash balances have gone up by more than the free reserves, and the reason for that is that the Academy Trusts received significant amounts of capital monies which have not been spent by the year end. As part of the preparation for our report, we did a survey. Now, this was before the last lockdown, and what we found was approximately 17% of trusts were not looking to invest any more in IT as a result of the pandemic. But of the rest, most were looking to invest between sort of naught and £50,000. Although within the multi-academy trusts, we did have a number looking to invest more than £200,000, and in one case, more than £500,000. I do remind clients on a regular basis, though, that in respect to this ICT spend, it should be part of an integrated strategy. So looking at laptops, the tablets, the servers, the Wi-Fi, the security, and making sure all work together. One of the problems there is how do you actually sort of fund what can be at times a significant upfront lump sum, especially as trusts cannot borrow from third parties such as the banks or take out hire purchase agreements. So one of our suggestions has been could potentially be a loan fund from the government in the same way that there is for SIF funding. whereby that could be topped up by a loan from the government. Something to think about, something the government could possibly think about, and might well help some of the IT investment strategies, especially whereby there might be some sort of catch-up needed by some of the trusts. And then if we think about sort of the COVID impact for 2020, 21, some of this is going to be offset by the fact that we've got this catch-up package. I mean, we're talking about £1 billion here, of which sort of nearly £700 million are going to come into the sector. Some of it's being kept back for other sectors, but the majority is going to come into the sort of the local authority and the academy trust sector. So that will help. There's obviously been a big announcement in June around sort of capital funding, and that's sort of a long-term project, about £1 billion a year for about the next 10 years. And that will help academy trusts to the tune of about £315 million, we think, over the next year. So that's the positive side. The negatives, though, are obviously sort of cleaning costs are up. We're hearing that PPE is getting more expensive and there's more of it being bought, especially as schools having to look at things like mass testing. Supply costs are significantly up because the number of pupils this time are up on what they were previously, because the criteria have changed there. Whilst at the same time, the ability to claim these extra costs is going to be down, because again, the criteria have changed such that somebody who has historic reserves is not able to claim, whereas they would have done previously. Looking further into the future, the national funding formula now looks like it's going to be 22, 23 before that comes in. And just a reminder, that does include the Teachers' Pay Grant and the Teachers' Pension Scheme grant. So it's not quite as generous as it first appears. And we don't know what's happening with pay. We had all these discussions around sort of the starting salary for teachers increasing to £30,000, but now we're also hearing talk of potentially pay freezes. So as I say, that was just a few of the highlights. The report's about 44 pages long in total and covers other things around multi-academy trusts and internal assurance, which you might want to read up a bit more on. If you'd like to download a full copy of the report, please go to our website, or if you'd like a hard copy, then please fill in the details and forward them, and we'll provide you with one in due course. So on behalf of myself and my colleague Kevin Shotton, who between us we look after the majority of the academy trusts for Clive Owen, thank you very much for listening to this.